Hey guys, there was a recent, I guess you will say, property vacancy and zombie foreclosure report filed just before Halloween, the end of October. So we're going to talk about that today and how that impacts the marketplace and what you can do to get your hands on some of these. So welcome to Housing Bubble 2.0 News of the Week, or as I like to call it, another episode of As the Housing Market Turns. Randy Patrick here putting the realism back into real estate. Hope you're doing well. We're going to go at it today. So, zombie foreclosure and vacancy rates creep down. This was published October 30th by Adam Data Solutions. We're talking about what's happening in the industry with vacant properties and those that are becoming what's called zombie properties, i.e., foreclosures, zombie foreclosures that are vacant, sitting there doing nothing, and essentially available for those who want to do some research and get your hands on them. So, very interesting as to what goes on. I'm seeing more of these down here in our area in Central Florida right now. So, one thing, guys, if you're looking to find out more information about pre foreclosures, foreclosures, REOs, zombie properties, tax deeds, etc., you need a good data source. So, go to gethousingdata.com. That's gethousingdata.com. That's our affiliate link with foreclosure.com. It's got a 7-day free trial. Here's the thing, it's an inexpensive way to enter into this market to see what's happening either at your county, city, or zip code level. Lots of ways to search on the data and different criteria and filters as well. So gethousingdata.com. Check it out. It's worth your time to see what's happening in your local market. So this is the infographic they published. So really, are zombie foreclosures still lurking or are they finally dead? All right. So the eerie numbers nationwide. So apparently, there's 104 million plus residential homes across the U.S. That's their count. Out of those 104 million, about 1.4, just under 1.4 million properties are vacant. Now that's all of U.S. homes. That's not just foreclosure. That's every type of home in the U.S. So they could be secondary homes, they could be vacation homes, they could be homes that are sort of in between probate or being passed on to heirs. They could be, rental investment homes, whatever. So that vacant property list is a pretty broad number. They're also saying the pre-foreclosure properties right now are about 200 and almost 229,000 pre-foreclosure properties across the U.S. Personally, I tend to think there's a lot more out there. But again, this is how they calculate their numbers. So we're going to go with with what they're saying right now, even though there's a ton more out there, right? So out of those 229,000, almost, we'll call it pre-foreclosure properties, almost 7,500. So 7,448 are zombie houses. So in other words, they basically are in the pre-foreclosure process and they've been abandoned by the homeowners and they're not yet foreclosed upon. If they're saying pre-foreclosure, that's before the foreclosure auction, so before a third-party bidder bids on it and wins it at the auction, or before the bank takes it back at the auction as well too. All right, so please keep that in mind. Obviously, when you take a look at the top states with the highest or greatest zombie foreclosure rates, we got Kansas, okay, number one, and you can see what's down there for the rest. Now, realize that foreclosure rates are not a pay count. Foreclosure rates are like a 1 unit per X number of housing units to give yourself a ratio and a rate here. All right, so just realize that you may look at a smaller we'll call it a smaller habitated state like maybe Iowa here, Oregon, Indiana, Ohio. I mean, there's some pretty big cities there, but it's basically how many per one per X number of housing units that gives you your rate. Which, as I said, I don't even look at that personally. It's just information to have out there, but it's not indicative of an overall pay count. So vacancy rates were of course higher for investment properties. So homes owned by institutional investors were slightly more likely than typical homes to be vacant in the fourth quarter. Um, excuse me, out of the 880 investor-owned properties nationwide, 3.5% were not occupied, compared to the overall national rate of 3.3%. So a little more unoccupied, but again, not a huge number. All right. And again, if you have institutional investors, which are hedge funds or REITs that have large holdings, clearly, vacant property could be, yeah, you vacated, a renter has vacated or been evicted, and you're in between, putting the next person in there, right? States with the highest vacancy rates for investor-owned homes were Indiana, Illinois, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Kansas. The lowest rates were New Hampshire, Vermont, Idaho, Utah, and North Dakota. I'm going to probably make an assumption here that there is less investor owned properties in those states because because there's less going on, right? So I'm not, I don't know whether New Hampshire is a big, a big area for investment home opportunities, for example, right? Whereas obviously, Illinois would be Kansas, Oklahoma, etc. So, all right. So having said that, we'll go on to the next slide here. Now, there are some zip codes that have a higher concentration of zombies, all right? So we're taking a look at, zip codes with the highest zombie home rates are, Altadena, California, 56%, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 39.3%, Cleveland, Ohio, with 34%, St. Petersburg, Florida. So of all the foreclosures in 33703, almost 33% are zombies. And again, in 33708 in St. Petersburg, almost 33% are zombies. So, I'll be looking there. We're doing deals in those locations anyway, but it's just interesting to note that, as I say, so part of my deal when I'm working on short sales and short payoffs on other distressed properties is I do drive zip codes looking at the distress. And the reason being, if I see a home that's vacant, then I know the homeowner has essentially abandoned the home. They've kind of divested themselves from the problem. And I'm going to try to reach out to them to say, hey, we can actually make this go away, settle your debt, take care of the issue, etc. So also I do think that in Florida, we do have a higher concentration of retirees or people who are aging out and coming down here that may have moved on to, say, an assisted living facility or have possibly passed on. So therefore, you've got heirs that not in Florida, other parts of the country that just aren't really in a position to deal with the home, so they're going to get there. They got to run probate, things like that. So that's why I noticed that for some reason the St. Petersburg zip codes always kind of pop up with a higher concentration of the zombie properties. So nothing to be worried about there. Now, listen, with zombie foreclosures, I actually did a video on this a few years ago. All right, this is me actually. It's the thumbnail from one of the YouTube videos from about 3 years ago, and 3 or 4 years ago, and we had just started to work on this property. All right, so that's my walkthrough video on this. And if you recall, if you've been with me for a while here, as far as being subscribers or watching the videos, this is the property itself. And the fun part about this is that this home was actually on A&E Zombie House Flipping show. I think it was season 1, episode 4, and it was the Tampa franchise. So this property actually was featured. They bought it, and then they fixed it, and then they resold it. So it turned out very nice. But again, it's on A&E. I was not on in the episode, unfortunately, but this is the deal. This is my deal. I was the architect of the deal. As you can see, what's the thing with zombie properties? Well, a lot of times they are beat up and messed up like this, holes in roof, mold, squatters, drug use, damage, the whole bit. This place was a mess, all right? These pictures don't do it justice. There was a first mortgage, a second mortgage. It had tax liens, had code violations. It was actually vacant for 11 years. The previous homeowner thought that, the property was going to foreclosure, so they actually left the property. They left the state, and they were essentially an out-of-state owner. And it wasn't until they were contacted, they thought it went to foreclosure sale. They were completely shocked that this property was still in their name, believe it or not. So in the end, I did our short sale, short payoff magic, and we got 73% discount off the mortgages. We took care of the tax liens and the code violation we settled with, and we were able to move this to the star, Dolmar, of Zombie Foreclosure, Zombie House Flipping in Tampa, and he did his magic and rehabbed it and put it up for sale and did a good deal on this. So again, stuff like this happens all the time. Florida, I literally am walking to properties that are freaking mess. Okay, anywhere in the state. So to me, this is just my daily. This is my daily. I don't know what you say, regimen here, checking properties like this out and trying to connect with homeowners. Simple as that. So anyway, fun little story. But my point though is that this stuff exists, all right? And there's always a reason or circumstances of how it gets set up to get to this point. And it really boils down to it's essentially like a detective work. Figure out who the players are, who the lien holders are, and try to put together a deal. Simple as that. It's actually a lot of fun. All right. So once again, folks, if you enjoy and like the information I provide in my videos, if you could subscribe, I would really appreciate that. So thank you. All right. So zombie foreclosure rates by state. I'm not going to get into this again because it's. I'll just give you the first and the last ones, okay? Just because it ebbs and flows, right? It's a ratio. It's not necessarily a peg count. All right. But again, we're talking about the fourth quarter, which we're in the fourth quarter now of 2025. Atom Data Solutions think there's about 229,000 pre-foreclosures or in the process of foreclosure right now. So that's what's going on, across the board. What's driving foreclosure trends? Well, they according to these guys, if they're saying they remains near historic lows, reflecting housing demand and tighter lending standards. Despite persistent affordability challenges, most homeowners maintain substantial equity, potentially reducing the likelihood of abandonment during the foreclosure proceedings. Gradual increases in foreclosure activity have not translated into widespread vacancy. Overall, the stability in zombie foreclosure rates suggest a housing market that remains resilient even amid economic headwinds. Okay, so that's a pretty big statement there. So what they're basically saying is that this zombie foreclosure volume doesn't make any impact in the marketplace, so don't worry about it. All right. Well, that's where we are today. I disagree with some of those statements. Okay. If you're in a zombie foreclosure situation, it usually is because there's no equity, or when you take a look at the condition of the property versus what's owed, no one's going to pay off the mortgage or the liens and then have to put all this extra money in to fix the property up. So really, I think that's kind of a red herring statement there. It doesn't suggest a resilient housing market. It's just not that much. There's not that many of them out there. Also, the reason being, there's strong housing demand and tighter lending standards. Tighter lending standards is that typical crap that they always say, well, we don't have subprime mortgage issues, and that's back in the day when there's all these wild and wonderful mortgages that were out there. It doesn't make it, that's irrelevant to the zombie house market. Okay, so nobody's buying these nasty houses unless you're investors. That's number one. So it's not a retail play. So therefore, and if you get to that point where you have a zombie property, it's not it's not due to or lack thereof. It's not from tighter lending standards. It's because of personal economics and circumstance, right? So a lot of zombie properties are potential probate deals where the owner has passed away and then the property has fallen into disrepair. All right, and they're not paying the mortgage. So that to me is not a lending standard situation. It's basically a circumstance of life and the economy, right? So also what I do want to talk about is the equity reducing the likelihood of abandonment during the foreclosure proceedings. Now, this is what's unique. So last housing crisis, because we fully participated in that big time, starting off in 2006 when things started to break through and break apart, in the real estate market. I can tell you that the sentiment among homeowners was, oh, we'll short sell our property because I'll rent for 2 years, then I'll be back on the track, or I've fixed my problems and my income's better and my problems are over, and I can buy another house. That was the sentiment. So people were actually coming to the surface and short selling their properties. Yes, there was a ton of foreclosures going on because the lenders could not handle the volume. There's a lot of issues behind the scenes that went on as well too. But in the end, homeowners were more likely to ask for help, receive help, and move on, and then restructure themselves to move forward to buy properties a few years later. Where we are today is a little different, and why I say that is the fact that we don't see maybe as many we'll call it short sales coming to the surface, or potential short sales, because homeowners that can't afford their mortgage can pretty much not afford rent. So rents have become very expensive, have skyrocketed over the years, right? So home appreciation, rental appreciation, has not been, I guess we'll call it, in line with wage appreciation. That the two are quite divergent at the end. Obviously, home and rent appreciation's gone like this, whereas wage appreciation is more on a linear as opposed to exponential or high pitch on its growth, right? So if you're a homeowner and you can't afford a $1,500 or $2,000 mortgage payment for personal, economic, life reasons, okay, which everyone has them, which is understandable, you're not going to afford rent because a two-bedroom place, I mean, just the difference in rent. So what they're doing is they're kind of going, well, I'm not pushing a solution to my pre-foreclosure foreclosure situation because I'm going to have to go someplace and pay, and I may not have that money, or I don't want to pay that money. You see, so this is the difference between last housing crisis and where we are today. So homeowners are essentially squatting in their properties to avoid paying high rent or expending capital, and they want to stay as long as they can until they're essentially forced out. All right, so that's the big difference here. Now, things are changing again in the marketplace. Lenders are starting to do more foreclosures. Things are coming to fruition. A lot more is happening behind the scenes. So we're going to start seeing some changes very, very soon. We're already seeing it this fall. The amount of people that are coming to the surface with us and responding to us has dramatically increased. So the market's changing again, guys. It may not be the exact same as the last housing crisis. We're going to be metro specific, and each metro is going to have their issues. So it's going to take a while to play out here. But my point is that these are always going to be here. Foreclosures have always been there. Zombie foreclosures have always been there. It's just a matter of volume and when they're picking up and slowing down the pace. All right. But again, difference between last crisis and where we are today, the homeowners don't want to leave their home because right now they're not paying and still allowed to stay there during the foreclosure process. And if they leave, they're going to have to now ante up money for rental, and they may not have the cash or want to spend that much money. All right. So please keep that in mind. So again, the foreclosure rates by state, this is the top 10. Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Iowa, New Mexico, Oregon, Alaska, Indiana, Ohio, Missouri. All right. So we can take a look at the percentage being that ratio is higher when you actually look at the peg count. Like, for example, South Dakota has a 13% zombie foreclosures, but there's only 3. Okay. It's 3 peg count. So, okay. So what's, I'm not going to do math in public here, but whatever 3 divided by whatever number is going to give you, like probably what, 32, 33 roughly is going to give you maybe a bit less. Is going to give you that 13%. So those rates can be somewhat misleading as opposed to pay counts. If you go down to Indiana, for example, 6% zombie foreclosure rate, but 219 zombie foreclosure pay count. That's a little different, you see. So again, you can see how that explains. Now, the back end here, your state with the lowest rate is New Jersey, less than 1% zombie foreclosures, yet there's 180 via pay count. So you can see how that ratio thing doesn't always equate to what truly is happening in the marketplace. It's just statistics, different way of looking at stuff, right? So some zip codes see far higher concentration of zombies, obviously, right? As I mentioned before, you've got your St. Petersburgs, your Clevelands, whatever. You're going to see some of that as well picking up here. We're moving, so that's again, it all sort of makes sense, right? Certain areas for certain reasons are going to have higher numbers, pay count, and rates. Okay. Home equity rates decline in the third quarter. So kind of going with the zombie foreclosure, we'll call it concept here. We're talking about equity and what's out there in the marketplace. So again, towards the end of October, as Adam puts out their third quarter, we'll call it. It's basically their U.S. home equity and underwater report. So 46.1% of mortgaged residential properties in the country were equity rich, meaning that they have more than 50% equity when you're taking a look at what's owed versus their market value, right? So that's a pretty decent number here. Now, I don't really care about that. I look at the homes that are underwater, okay? So they what they call their seriously underwater homes. So that basically saying here that 2.8% of mortgaged properties, residential properties, were considered seriously underwater in the third quarter of 2025, meaning the combined estimated balance of loans secured by the properties were at least 25% more than the property's estimated market value. That was up slightly from the second quarter and up a bit from the same time, third quarter of 2024. But realize what they're saying here is that it's that seriously underwater means 25% or more. So for example, your property's current market value is $100,000, yet your mortgage balance is $125,000. Okay, so ultimately, what's going to happen if you're going to sell that home to somebody? So you're either, if you're underwater and someone's buying it for market value for $100,000, you got to bring $25,000 to closing plus closing costs, commissions, whatever, to pay off that loan. So people aren't going to do that. So then they either they're house poor, or this is where a short sale comes into play. Now realize that they're saying here that 25% more means you're seriously underwater. All right. What they don't ever talk about is that, well, what about 1% to 24% underwater? What's that ratio? They never talk about that. And again, it boils down to the fact that if I'm 20% underwater, am I going to put my home up for sale in the open marketplace? Probably not. Am I 15%? Am I going to put my home on the marketplace? No. So, you're either going to stay in your home and kind of ride this out. And I can look at it now going, if you're underwater right now, we've already gone through sort of exponential growth as far as values are concerned over the past few years. So this is not going to change anytime soon. You're actually going to have, it's going to be worse for you for being underwater. And again, that's just balance of loans and market value. That doesn't include things like closing costs, real estate commissions, etc. That'll further tap into that lack of equity that you don't already have to make it even worse for you. So this is either your house poor and you're sticking it out, or ultimately, if you got to move or do something about it, you're going to be down that short sale path for sure here. All right. So they're on the rise in most states here. Obviously, we've got largest annual increases. Well, I guess share of mortgage properties considered seriously underwater rose in 35 states. Okay, and in 46 states year over year. I guess the annual increases of underwater homes were D.C., Maryland, Louisiana, Georgia, and Oklahoma. They were up. All right. States with the largest annual drops, again, Mississippi, Wyoming, Vermont, South Dakota, New York. New York is interesting. But, some of these places aren't the huge populations. I don't see those being real estate boom towns, to be quite honest with your locations. Obviously, we've got, the lowest rates of seriously underwater homes were in San Jose, California, Providence, Rhode Island, San Diego, California, Boston, and LA. All right. So larger cities with probably higher than average price appreciation of the years. LA I find kind of interesting just because of the volume that's there. But again, maybe LA proper. You go out to Riverside, San Bernardino, etc., and that number changes. The highest rates of seriously underwater homes are Baton Rouge, Louisiana, New Orleans, Little Rock, Arkansas, Jackson, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee. All right. And then you take a look at the zip codes. Well, let's take a look at them here. Looks like East Chester, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, another one in Philadelphia, 3 in Philadelphia, and 1 in Baton Rouge. So there's certain underwater homes and certain, we'll call it zip codes that you may want to take a look at if you're looking to figure this stuff out. So again, this is just where, how the market plays out. Some markets are hot, some markets aren't. And then the markets that aren't hot, all these other issues are going to manifest itself out. So there you go, guys. So anyway, so why do I talk about this? Because this is what we actually do. So Zombie Foreclosures is part of the mix. We work with foreclosure auctions, the bank-owned stuff that's been taken back. Obviously, short sales and short payoffs are our specialty. Doing sub-2, purchasing the mortgage sub-2, homeowner and HOA and condo association foreclosures, tax deed foreclosures, probate and estate foreclosures, the zombie ones. A lot of stuff down here, underinsured property with flood and stuff, working on those. Code violations in the mix, people who are in bankruptcy. We do retail buying through Novation. If you haven't heard about that, you can ask me. Surplus overage on foreclosure auctions, and distressed note buying. So we cover pretty much all of these items in our everyday business here. So it doesn't matter what the situation is for a property, we can pretty much handle it. All right. So anyway, guys, that's it for today. Once again, I appreciate the views, likes, and comments. Please share the video with your family and friends. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And we look forward to speaking with you shortly. And again, the market is changing. Reach out to me if you want to learn about this and you need more information. All right. Take care.